You're not living your life right now. You're living the version of it that exists while you wait for the real one to begin. Maybe you're waiting until the money situation stabilizes, until the kids are older, until the job gets less insane, the health improves, the relationship finds its rhythm, the timing finally feels right. You've told yourself this is just a difficult stretch, a phase. You've told yourself you're being smart, realistic, patient, but there's something underneath that story you haven't looked at directly. Something that's been there for longer than this phase has. Because here's what's true. You're not waiting for conditions to improve. You're waiting for permission. Permission to finally show up fully in your own life. To take the risks, make the moves, say the things, build the things you keep putting off until the circumstances cooperate. And the circumstances never quite cooperate. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his life, much of it in physical agony, in isolation, in poverty, in a level of intellectual loneliness that would break most people, asking a single question. What makes a human life genuinely worth living? Not comfortable, not easy, worth living. And what he found, buried inside that question, was a truth so uncomfortable that most people instinctively turn away from it before it lands. The difficulty you're waiting to escape, it isn't coming to an end. Not because you're doing something wrong, not because you've had worse luck than other people, but because difficulty is not a phase of human life. It is the structure of it, the texture of it, the permanent condition of being alive. You were never going to get to the other side of it. There is no other side. And every day you spend waiting for one is a day of your only existence spent in a waiting room for a door that was never there. Nietzsche wouldn't comfort you with that. He'd hand it to you like something you'd dropped and forgotten, something that, once you actually hold it, changes how you move through everything that comes next. Nobody thinks they're postponing their life permanently. That's not how the story feels from the inside. From the inside, it feels like strategy. You're being responsible. You're waiting for the right moment. And the right moment is almost here. Once this particular obstacle clears, you'll have the space you need. That's not avoidance. That's just being smart about timing. Nietzsche would call it something else. He'd call it the fundamental illusion, the belief that your current difficulty is a temporary deviation from a life that is supposed to be manageable, stable, and eventually easy. The belief that somewhere ahead, the terrain flattens out. It never flattens out. The terrain just changes. You finish school and discover that work brings a completely different set of pressures, ones nobody warned you about, and that studying did nothing to prepare you for. You build the career and find that success introduces its own specific cruelties, the exposure, the expectation, the fear of losing what you worked to get. You find the relationship, and the relationship is beautiful, and also requires more of you than you knew you had. You retire and discover that the freedom you waited decades for arrives alongside a silence that has its own weight. This is not pessimism. This is the pattern. And Nietzsche saw it with unusual clarity. Life does not have a phase where everything gets resolved. It has a permanent succession of different problems, different pressures, different forms of uncertainty. What changes is not the presence of difficulty. What changes is its shape. The cruel part isn't that this is true. The cruel part is that the illusion is so convincing. Because every phase does eventually end. The financial crisis passes, the health scare resolves, the project finishes. And for a moment, you feel like you've arrived, like this is it, like now you can breathe. And then the next thing arrives. It always does. Which means the person who is waiting for life to become easy before they start living it fully is not waiting for a specific obstacle to clear. They are waiting for something that the structure of existence will never deliver. They are, without knowing it, waiting forever. That realization should feel like something breaking open. Because what breaks isn't hope. It's the illusion that was quietly eating your time. And once it breaks, a harder question surfaces. If you've always known, somewhere underneath, that it was never going to get easier, then what is the waiting actually about? What are you really protecting yourself from? That's where we're going next. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Here is the question nobody wants to sit with. If your circumstances magically resolve tomorrow, the money, the time, the health, the stability, would you actually do what you say you're waiting to do? Be honest. Not the answer you'd give out loud, the one you already know. Most people wouldn't. They'd find something else. A new reason the timing still isn't quite right. A new condition that needs to be met first. The obstacle would shift, and the waiting would continue, wearing a different explanation. Because the problem was never the obstacle. The obstacle was just the most available excuse. Nietzsche was merciless about this. He understood that the human mind, when it wants to avoid something, is extraordinarily creative at constructing justifications that feel completely reasonable. You don't experience it as fear. You experience it as prudence, as wisdom, as knowing yourself well enough to wait until you're ready. But underneath the reasonableness, something else is happening. You are afraid of what it means to actually live fully. The risk of it, the exposure, the possibility of trying and discovering that the life you imagined doesn't materialize. Or worse, that it does, and it still isn't enough. Full engagement with your own existence is terrifying in a way that waiting is not. Waiting is safe. Nothing can fail while it's still pending. This is what Nietzsche called the cowardice that doesn't know its own name. Not the dramatic kind, not running from danger or collapsing under pressure. The quiet kind, the kind that builds a perfectly rational case for postponement and then lives inside that case for years, decades, a whole life sometimes. And the unbearable part is that it works. The waiting works as a strategy for avoiding the thing you're afraid of. It just costs you everything else in the process. So the real question isn't, when will conditions be right? The real question is, what exactly are you afraid will happen if you stop waiting and start now? Imperfectly, incompletely, without guarantees. Name it. Not to yourself in the abstract, but specifically. Because until you name it, it runs you without your awareness. It sits behind every reasonable explanation you've ever given for why now isn't the time. The fear is real. Nietzsche never pretended it wasn't. But he made a distinction that changes everything, between the person who feels fear and retreats into waiting, and the person who feels fear and moves anyway, using the resistance itself as the material they work with. That distinction, between difficulty as obstacle and difficulty as raw material, is where we're going next. Forget what that phrase has become. It got turned into a bumper sticker, a gym slogan, something you say to someone after a bad week to make them feel better. That's not what Nietzsche meant, not even close. What he meant was structural, not motivational. His argument wasn't that suffering builds character in some vague, inspirational sense. His argument was that the people who live with the most depth, creativity, and genuine presence are not the ones who suffered least. They're the ones who stopped treating suffering as the enemy of a good life and started using it as the substance of one. That's a completely different claim, and it cuts much deeper. Think about the artist who creates something that actually reaches people. Not the technically proficient work, the work that lands, that stays with you, that feels true. That work almost never comes from comfort. It comes from someone who had something unresolved inside them and didn't look away from it. The difficulty wasn't despite the work. It was in the work. It became the work. Think about the person you know who has genuine wisdom. Not information, not intelligence, but the kind of understanding that only comes from having been broken by something and rebuilt differently. You don't develop that in easy years. You develop it in the years that asked more of you than you thought you had. Nietzsche saw this not as coincidence, but as necessity. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he writes that for the creator to appear, suffering itself is needed, and much transformation, not suffering as punishment, suffering as the condition under which something real becomes possible. The fire that reduces you to ash is the same fire that makes you new. This is what the waiting robs you of, not just time. It robs you of the transformation that was available inside the difficulty you were trying to outlast. Every hard season you've moved through consciously, not avoiding, not numbing, but actually moving through, has made you more capable of the next one. The people who avoid difficulty don't get to skip the suffering. They just never develop the capacity that comes from meeting it directly, which means the logic of waiting, "I'll live fully once things get easier," is backwards. The life you're waiting to live requires exactly the person you would have become by living fully now, inside the difficulty, not after it. And there's a thought experiment Nietzsche designed that makes this impossible to ignore. A question so heavy that if you let it actually land, it doesn't leave you. That's where we're going next. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Imagine a demon appears to you in your loneliest moment and tells you this: the life you are living right now. Every detail of it, every joy, every frustration, every ordinary Tuesday, every moment of waiting, you will have to live again, infinitely, exactly as it is. Nothing changes, nothing improves. The same sequence, the same choices, the same days, repeated without end. Nietzsche posed this question in The Gay Science and called it the heaviest weight, not because it's literally true, but because of what your reaction to it reveals. If that demon appeared tonight, what would you feel? Would you collapse, cursing the life you've been living, suddenly aware of how much of it you've spent waiting, postponing, surviving instead of inhabiting? Or would you feel something closer to what Nietzsche described as the only adequate response, the recognition that you have lived, or are living, in a way that you would choose again, that the life is yours, fully, and you would say yes to all of it? Most people, if they're honest, would feel the collapse first, because when you strip away the future, the version of life that's coming when things get easier, the plans that justify the waiting, the someday that makes the now tolerable, what remains is just this: what you're actually doing with your days. And for most people, that picture is harder to look at than they expected. That's the weight Nietzsche was talking about, not the demon's words. Your answer, the question, "Do you want this again and innumerable times again?" lands on your life like a verdict. And a life built on waiting fails that verdict completely, because you cannot say yes to a life you were never fully present for. This is not designed to crush you. It's designed to cut through the comfortable numbness of postponement, to make the cost of waiting suddenly, viscerally real, not as an abstract future regret, but as something you can feel right now, in this moment, about the days you are currently living. The question doesn't ask what you plan to do eventually. It asks what you are doing now, with this, with the actual life in front of you, difficulties included. And here's what Nietzsche found on the other side of that question. Not despair, but something he called the most radical act available to a human being. The choice to say yes, not to the life you're waiting for, to the life you have. That choice has a name, and it changes everything about how you move through what comes next. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche wrote something that sounds simple until you understand what it costs. I want to learn more and more to see what is necessary in things as beautiful. Thus, I will be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor Fati. Let that be my love from now on. Love your fate, not tolerate it, not endure it, love it. That is not a passive idea. It is the most demanding psychological posture Nietzsche ever described. And he knew it. To practice Amor Fati is not to pretend that your circumstances are good when they aren't. It's not gratitude journaling. It's not reframing difficulty as a hidden blessing. It is something much harder and much more honest than any of that. It is the active choice to stop treating your life as a problem to be solved before it can be lived. Most people relate to their own existence in a fundamentally adversarial way. There is the life they have and the life they want. And the distance between those two things is experienced as something that must be closed before real living can begin. The gap is the enemy. The circumstances are the obstacle. The difficulty is the reason to wait. And so they wait, resentful and suspended, for the gap to close on its own. Amor Fati says, the gap is the life. The difficulty is not blocking your existence. It is your existence. And the moment you stop fighting that and start working with it, something shifts that no change in external circumstances could have produced. This is where the practical becomes inseparable from the philosophical. Because Amor Fati is not just an attitude. It is a decision that has to be made concrete today in the specific life you are actually living. Not eventually, not when you feel ready. Nietzsche was unambiguous about this. You are never going to feel ready. The person who waits to feel ready before beginning has confused readiness with certainty, and certainty never comes. So here is what this looks like in practice. You identify the one thing you have been postponing. The project, the conversation, the creative work, the change, and you begin the smallest possible version of it today. Not the version you'd begin if conditions were ideal. The version that is available right now, inside your actual life, with everything that's currently in the way still in the way. You write the first paragraph. You make the first call. You take the first step that is actually accessible to you today, not the first step of the life you're waiting to have. And you use what's hard as material, not as excuse. The financial pressure, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, these are not reasons to wait. They are the specific conditions inside which something real can be built. Nietzsche knew that what is created under resistance has a depth that comfort cannot produce. The work you do while things are difficult carries the mark of that difficulty. That mark is not a flaw. It is what makes it matter. You also stop saying one day and give it a date. A real one. Not when things settle. By a specific point in time, you will have taken a specific action. The open-ended someday is how the waiting sustains itself indefinitely. A date collapses the infinite postponement into something you are either doing or consciously choosing not to do. Both are more honest than someday. Amor Fati is the decision to say yes to your life as it actually is. Not resignedly, but completely. To look at the difficulty, the imperfection, the uncertainty, and choose it. Choose to work inside it. Choose to create inside it. Choose to be fully present inside it, right now, without waiting for it to become something easier first. That decision doesn't require your circumstances to change. It only requires you to stop waiting for them to. And that brings us to the one truth this entire video has been building toward. The one most people spend a lifetime avoiding. That's where we end. You are going to die, not as a concept, not as something you acknowledge and then set aside, as a fact that is operating on your life right now, whether you look at it or not. The number of days you have is finite, and the days you spend waiting, genuinely waiting, suspended, living the provisional version of your own existence, those days do not pause the count, they spend it. This is the truth Nietzsche kept returning to, not to frighten, but to cut through the anesthetic. Because the waiting feels safe. It feels like preservation, like you're holding something in reserve until the right moment arrives. but you are not holding anything in reserve. You are spending your life. Every day that passes in the waiting room is a day that was yours and is now gone. Most people know this in the abstract. Knowing it in the abstract does nothing. What does something is the specific version of it, the image of yourself at the end, not in some distant, theoretical future, but as close and real as you can make it. Looking back at the years you had, not the years you planned to have once things got easier, the years you actually lived. And the question isn't whether you were happy or successful or comfortable. The question is whether you were there, whether you showed up fully in the life you had, or whether you spent it waiting for a different one. That image is the hardest thing in this video. Harder than the demon, harder than the eternal return, because it isn't a thought experiment, it's a preview. And the distance between that version of you and the choices available to you today is the only distance that actually matters. Nietzsche's philosophy of Amor Fati was never about accepting passivity. It was about the radical refusal to squander the existence you have been given by holding it hostage to conditions that will never fully arrive. The person who lives by it does not have fewer problems. They are not more comfortable, more certain, more ready. They have simply made a decision, a real one, not a felt one, that this life, the actual one, the difficult and unfinished and uncertain one, is the one they are going to inhabit, completely. Now. So here is what you do, not eventually. Today, you identify the one thing you have been waiting to do until life gets easier. The one thing that, if you are honest with yourself, you already know you are using your circumstances to avoid. And you take the first step that is genuinely available to you today. Not the ideal step, not the step you'd take if everything were in place, but the real one. The small one, the one that exists inside your actual life right now. That step is not the whole answer, but it is the only place the answer ever begins, not in better conditions, not in a quieter season. Here, now, with everything still in the way. The life you are waiting for is not coming. The life you have is already happening. The only question Nietzsche ever really asked, the one that cuts beneath every other question, is whether you are going to say yes to it. If something shifted in you while watching this, don't let it settle back into the noise. There is more work to do, and some part of you already knows it isn't finished. The next video is there when you're ready, and you'll know you're ready because you won't be waiting to feel that way.